Welcome to Wildlife Rehabilitation from Rescue to Release, a podcast dedicated to licensed wildlife rehabilitators and the veterinarians who support them. I'm your host, Gail Buell. Techniques we discuss here are meant for licensed wildlife professionals. If you aren't licensed and trained for wildlife rehabilitation, do not attempt to capture, hold, or rehabilitate any wild animal. If you find an injured wild animal, a wildlife professional can recommend next steps. We will tackle topics about rescue, care, management, reconditioning, and releasing wildlife found in North America. This is a deep dive into each subject. We hope to give rehabilitators information they can use because they're already going to great lengths to rescue and nurse animals back to health. There are three possible outcomes in wildlife rehabilitation: release, euthanasia, and placement. An injured or orphaned wild animal's journey to restored health and independence in their natural habitat is delicate and complex. We draw techniques and expertise from many disciplines. Many animals brought into rehabilitation cannot be saved. The last gift we can give them is humane euthanasia. We'll talk more about when this is necessary. Sometimes animals are deemed non-releasable and evaluated to be suitable for a life in captivity. When that happens, we shift to a long-term approach to managing their care, training, and housing. Some such animals serve as ambassador animals, a term for animals that rehabilitators use to educate the public. Each episode, we'll speak with experts who represent specialty topics across the profession of wildlife rehabilitation, ambassador animal care and management, showcasing best practices. So today, we're going to focus on something a bit different than our usual species-themed deep dive. Instead, we'll zoom out on the wildlife rehabilitation sector and look at communications and outreach. That is, how we explain what we do and don't do, and why the practice of wildlife rehabilitation is vital to total ecosystem health. Public understanding of wildlife rehabilitation ranges greatly from place to place. At worst, it's perceived as in conflict with nature. In many places, the general public knows we're around and want to be supportive, but they still don't fully grasp why we do all that we do.
I mean, why bother rehabilitating rabbits?
That's Kirk, my podcast producer, and the magic behind the podcast and how great it sounds. But he's also the new outreach specialist at Partners for Wildlife. He asked me this when we first started working together on the podcast.
Because after all, rabbits reproduce like, well, rabbits.
Very true.
And not to put too fine a point on it, but you realize you're pouring all this hard work into rehabilitating an animal that may well just get eaten, right?
Yes. And you have just illustrated why we need to talk more about outreach.
Right. Well, but in all seriousness, now that you've gotten me up to speed on wildlife rehabilitation, I hope, play a role in helping all of us do better education and outreach.
Exactly.
So I'm guessing I wasn't the first member of the general public to think rehabilitators only take in endangered and at-risk species. And that's just one of the many possible gaps in understanding between our sector and the public. Maybe even a lot of government officials tasked with regulating what we can and can't do with wildlife in each state. So since we're co-hosting today, let me ask you, what are some common misconceptions you see out there about wildlife rehabilitation? And from there, I guess we can get into possible strategies for us and our rehabilitator audience and how we could possibly tackle those. So what do you think?
Well, being that I'm a rehabilitator, there's a lot of things that I've certainly seen over the years as far as what might be needed for outreach. And part of that is what I hear from the general public when they're reaching out to me for assistance. Either they have an injured animal or they have a question that they're just not finding any answers for. So one of the biggest misconceptions, and it's more or less by species than anything, is a misconception about what actually is an orphan.
Yeah.
Wildlife rehabilitators take in a lot of orphans every year and try to raise them wild and then set them free back out into nature, right?
Yeah, got that.
And Right. So that's what we want to do. But a lot of people, the general public, will see an animal by itself, a young juvenile animal at whatever age stage, and automatically assume that it must be an orphan because they can't see the mom. In particular, that's how they say it. Well, I haven't seen the mother around.
I just pictured a baby deer when you said that.
And yes, that boy, right around
biggest
Memorial
culprits, right?
Day in Minnesota, that's when it all happens. They are all dropping their fawns right around that time, and we get a lot of calls. And so one of the roles that wildlife rehabilitators play all the time is to not only talk the general public off the ledge because they're convinced that that is an orphan, but really relate to them succinctly what the natural history of white-tailed deer in this case is, and how come you would find a fawn by itself and the mother not right there. The reason, or one of the main reasons, that a lot of people assume that a deer fawn found by itself is an orphan is because if a human baby was left alone in the woods, we would walk up on and say, this animal needs help. This person needs help. It's a baby. Most of the time, there's a parent with the young infant, right?
We're great at projecting our own situations onto animals, aren't we?
We really are. And in one way, that's fine because that's our reference point. That's our experience. So that's our reference point. So we're going to do that. And it is sometimes hard when you're working with a finder or someone who's called you about this particular situation to convince them that they need to leave that baby alone.
But it's all alone.
But it's all alone, and big brown eyes, and it's looking at you with those big brown eyes, and it's helpless. But it's not helpless. That's the key, is that as we're talking to people, we can talk about not just white-tailed deer, but how nature and evolution has prepared white-tailed deer fawns to be protected just by laying still. And those spots on the baby fawns have a role to play. And the mother or the doe is probably watching you. So trying to explain all that and making sure that, number one, that they understand the natural history. And number two, try to make sure, because sometimes the fawn does need assistance. So there are things that we know that we can walk them through and have them be our eyes and ears so that we can decide over the phone or have them send pictures or video or things like that so we can help them decide whether or not that animal truly needs help. Most of the time, they do not need help. The other key to this whole thing is we want to make sure not only to explain correctly. We don't want to make anything up, but explain correctly what's going on with the natural history. But we also want to give the finder action items. They want to do something. So we try to help direct them so they can do something in a way that will help give us more information. So for example, with white-tailed deer fawns, I am very likely to say, can you keep your dogs away? Bring your dogs in the house. I would like you to leave the fawn alone and come back and check on it in 24 hours. But it doesn't mean I want you to stand 5 feet away from that animal and watch for the mother to come back, because mom won't come back.
Yeah, we're not setting up a fold-out chair. And,
Exactly. You need to go away. And then I want you to recheck in 24 hours. It might be 12 hours if there's some circumstances that need that, but most of the time it's 24 hours. And if that baby is still in the same spot, you're going to call me back. And then I'm going to give you a next set of instructions. Or I might go out and check if I have that capability. So I think that's one of the number one misconceptions or number one things that we help the public with. And is giving them more information right when they need it. They are open to that type of education at that point most of the time, and it's very, very helpful for them. Most rehabilitators can spend a little bit more time with a finder compared to like the Department of Natural Resources or places like that just may not have quite the amount of bandwidth because they're getting a lot more phone calls than we are, and we can help with that. And that's part of what we do.
Well, I kind of want to back up a little bit. How is it that the public is getting in touch with you in the first place? Let's say I'm a member of the public, I haven't learned about this yet, and I find this white-tailed deer. I think I'm going on Google first.
Okay.
And I'm going to type what to do, who to call about orphaned white-tailed deer or something.
Yeah, and our lives are...
How are public finding their way to us in the first place? And is there a better job we can do about letting the public or people in general know about us, strengthening that path toward good advice?
So we now have Google, which when I first started in wildlife rehabilitation, that was not in existence at all. But a lot of the pathways for finding a wildlife rehabilitator is still the same. So I would Google too. I found an injured white-tailed deer, or I found a white-tailed deer fawn. What do I do? On that list that's going to be generated, one of them is going to be something like wildlife rehabilitators in your area or something like that. So then you can click on that and go down that rabbit hole and try to find someone that might be close to you. The other thing that a lot of people do, and they still reach for this, even if they might reach for Google or maybe not reach for Google, is they will talk to people that they know or that have a connection with the outdoors. So it might be their local conservation officer. It might be their state Department of Natural Resources or Fish and Game Department. It might be their veterinarian, because if they think that this animal is hurt, if they've got pets at home, they're going to think, what do I do if my pet was injured? I'm going to bring him to my vet. And so they will call their vet. Sometimes they do call universities. And sometimes if they're on Facebook, for example, this happens a fair amount on Facebook. So not just a browser like Google, but they will go on something like Facebook or Instagram or one of those social media platforms and try to find some answers there as well. And sometimes things come up and sometimes they don't. It's hard on something like Facebook if you're not already in the know and have a like on somebody's page that's a wildlife rehabilitator, for example. It's hard to know exactly what to ask on that platform to get the right information to pop up. But like in Minnesota, if you were to type in something like injured animal into your browser, one of the choices that will come up is a list by county for wildlife rehabilitators. And you click on that, and it's produced by the Department of Natural Resources, and it's all the permitted wildlife rehabilitators in the state of Minnesota. And you go down that list via county, and then it has people listed and then their contact information. And so most of the calls that I get, they will say on the message, I found your name on a list through the Department of Natural Resources. And then I know exactly how they found me. But in general, that's the pathway. Now, it is a double-edged sword. I'll just tell you this, to strengthen...
Now it's easier to find you. Is that where we're going with this?
A little bit. It's easier for people to find me, which is good. That's important because we do want to help people. The challenge, however, is because rehabilitators in general aren't paid. It's volunteer and things like that. All of a sudden now you're getting more calls than you had before. I'm an independent, so I rehabilitate and I'm by myself. Sometimes have my husband for help. And I can do quite a few animals, but it could get pretty overwhelming pretty quickly if I advertise out there and try to put my card, and I'm at a booth in all kinds of places and stuff, and now I'm getting 3 times the amount of phone calls. And in general, it's been shown that even if I put articles in the paper or do these booths at different community events or things like that, is that it doesn't bring in any money. any donations to help me buy the food, to help me buy the cages, to help me buy the incubators, and or, maybe even pay somebody to help me. So it's a double-edged sword. We really want people to find us, but on the other hand, we don't want to advertise so much that we're either not spreading the wealth, so to speak, or they're not utilizing other ways to find out some of the information.
Another big one that I have learned through doing this podcast with you is the fact that not all animals brought to us are going to get rehabbed to the point of being releasable. Now, how do we communicate with people about that sometimes touchy subject?
And it is a touchy subject because there's 3 outcomes in wildlife rehabilitation. It's release. That's what we all want. We want these animals back into the wild doing what they're supposed to be doing in nature. There is euthanasia. So, and then there's placement, right? Placement in an education facility. A lot of people, if they are bringing you an injured animal, will sometimes say something to the effect of, you're not going to euthanize it, are you? You're not going to kill it, are you? And I'm not a veterinarian, number one. And so no, I will not diagnose anything over the phone because I'm not a vet. I'm not, and I can't see it. I'm not going to tell you anything. And I'm going to say, it's going to go to my veterinarian. If it's injured, I'm going to look at it, but my veterinarian's going to look at it as well. And then we'll make a decision from there. A lot of times these animals come in very broken, and there is nothing we can do. We're getting better at what we do, and the veterinarians that help us are getting better at what they do to help wildlife, but there are still a lot of situations where we cannot help these animals. And the last gift we can give is euthanasia.
Right, because we started talking about orphans that we come across, but that doesn't even scratch the surface into reasons they end up with us.
Right.
And a lot of those have to do with physical trauma, vehicle collisions, collisions with other man-made objects.
Caught by cats. We could go on and on and on. So, it's almost all, not all, but a lot of it is anthropogenic or human caused. Just unintentional intersections with people. Sometimes it's intentional, but a lot of times it's unintentional. So then the other kind of misconception or something that they will say right away is, well, if it can't be released to the wild, can you put it in a zoo? Can you put it in a nature center or something like that? That right away, then that's the assumption that any kind of life is better than no life at all, even if, the life that they have would not be high quality. And there's, in the 3 spheres of what we can do, the release, euthanasia, and placement, when you're dealing with injured animals, the largest bucket in general is the euthanasia.
And I bet that's
really
a tough pill to swallow for a lot of folks who aren't familiar with what we do, right? Because
it's very hard, but we don't. Most of the time, when I'm talking to the general public, I don't tell them that. But if I'm talking to somebody else who's going to become a rehabilitator, who is a rehabilitator, especially if they're going to take injured, they need to know that it is a fact of wildlife rehabilitation. The second biggest bucket is release, and of course, that's what we want. We want that release. The smallest bucket is placement. And that's because of the types of injuries, permanent injuries some of these animals face. Some species are not appropriate in captivity. Some individuals are not appropriate in captivity. In fact, most of them are not. They need to pass behavioral assessments. They need to be medically sound. And there needs to be a place that is interested in that species and that individual. And that's a lot harder than people think it is.
Right. It's not just let's let it heal up in a kennel for a couple of weeks and then drop it off at the nature center,
local zoo or the nature center. Yep.
There's a lot of hoops to jump through, and at the other end of those hoops, there might not be a a place that can house them and that has all the right permitting, skills, resources. Right. So this is a less common outcome.
It is. And in a way, it's getting less common as far as an outcome, which I'm fully supportive of because, like I said, we're learning more and more and more about what just isn't appropriate, especially for a permanent injury for placement. But a lot of folks, if the general public is calling and they really have that focus on, you're not going to euthanize it or that kind of thing. I talk to them about, sometimes they are too broken and there's nothing that we can do. I also talk about that, my veterinarian is going to be involved in this and we want the best outcome for this animal. And I know that you as the finder really are interested in that too, that you want quality of life. One of the things that we are recording this in February in Minnesota, and rehabilitators across the entire state, but especially in the metro area, are getting calls. I've gotten 3 of these calls in the last day and a half about adult whitetail deer that are injured. That one leg is broken and the other 3 are okay, but the one leg is broken. And they're calling because they want help for this animal. And do I totally understand it. What is hard and takes a little while to explain is that in the urban environment, these animals are encountering things like cars, and sometimes they're not lucky and they get, tagged or hit or whatever, and then they have a fractured leg. Unfortunately, there are some species of animals, especially as adults, that do not do well in rehabilitation. And in fact, many of them don't even make it into rehabilitation because they will die before that happens. Or if you have them in captivity, they will struggle a lot to get out. And whitetail deer are one of them. Adult cervids in general can be very challenging to care for in a rehabilitation setting.
Some of the flightiest of the prey species, right?
Yeah, and we're predators, right? Every animal out there knows we're a predator. Everyone. We don't have to tell them or anything.
Yeah, we have
act
those
like predators,
forward-facing eyeballs
and we walk right up to them.
And we're pretty big as animals.
We are pretty big. But definitely it's those forward-facing eyes. And then we move. We act like a predator all the time. We don't even think about it. We just do. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that's the way we are. So the thing that surprises a lot of people is when I tell them that in the urban environment, 3-legged deer actually do just fine.
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
They do. Now, it certainly depends on the injury, and not all of them result in a deer that's fine going around 3-legged, if they've got an infection in that leg or something like that. So we give action items. Again, it's like, I want you to watch. You don't have to feed this animal. You can just kind of pay attention to what they're doing. Now, if they stay in the same place, laying down in the same place for 3 or 4 days, then you can call me back and I can give you instructions, but I'm going to have you challenge that animal. And all that means is I'm going to have you walk up to that deer and see if that deer can get up. If the deer can get up, we're fine. If the deer cannot get up, then we instruct people that they need to call their sheriff's department or their local conservation officer and see if they have the, depends on the time of year, how busy they are, to come out and dispatch the animal, because that is the kindest thing we can do if that animal can't get up anymore. And we're talking specifically about white-tailed deer here. But so that's one of the things I told somebody yesterday. A lot of people really assume that when they're talking to a wildlife rehabilitator that an animal needs to be rescued or something, it's going to be National Geographic. That we're going to be coming in with the helicopters and the big the big dart guns and the big airboats and the big everything, and the reality is much different than that. So there you go. That's another one of the kind of misconceptions. We can't help everything. We can't. We just can't.
And especially, let's just face it, white-tailed deer aren't exactly endangered in Minnesota.
Well, if you think about rehabilitation, rehabilitation is about an individual animal, right? Biologists at the state level will often say, we deal with population levels, and they do. They do. That's their focus, and that's great. And I'm glad that they're there, and they know a lot and all that kind of stuff. But for me and for rehabilitators, we have to keep the population in mind. There's no question about that. However, we're dealing with individuals, and kind of that's what we do. So, yeah, there's a lot of white-tailed deer around. There's a lot of raccoons and bunnies and all kinds of other things. And the person who has found that animal, however, is not thinking about the population. They're thinking about, they're being compassionate, and they are trying to help this individual animal. And so that's one of the things that we as rehabilitators try to help. So we are a community service. There's no question. If my cat got hit by a car, I would find a way to get it into the veterinarian, right? Now I'm footing that bill and all that kind of stuff. But so that's slightly different. But we do want people to be compassionate. And most of the injuries, and we talked about this earlier, most of the injuries we see are anthropogenic in nature. The cars, the power lines, the windows, the cats, the oil, on and on and on. When people tell me, let nature take its course, I don't think of cars and windows as nature. I think of, okay, what I don't want people to do, the general public to do, is bring me a young rabbit and say, the crows grabbed it and they were flying away with it, and I chased the crows away. And that is a situation that I don't want to say happens frequently, but happens. That's not appropriate.
Then we are
interfering and now you just took a meal away from that crow. And as sad as it is for that rabbit, 80% of cottontail rabbits die before their first birthday, and most of them get eaten by somebody else. Everybody likes to eat rabbit. That is a different scenario to me than I'm mowing my lawn and rabbits make very shallow nests a lot of times in people's yards, right?
Oh, I'm
mowing my lawn and I've just mown over this baby bunny nest. And maybe some of them are injured, maybe they're not injured. Don't know. It doesn't matter. But that's where, for me, then stepping in to do something, again, action items for the homeowner, in this case, I think is appropriate. And people, of course, are like, they feel horrible. They didn't mean to do it. It was an accident. And then they're like, what do? We would like to find some help. So those two situations are very different in my mind. One is definitely let nature take its course, as hard as it is to watch. I love National Geographic and Animal Planet shows and things like that. I love it. But I'm rooting for the predator and I'm also rooting for the prey. So I don't watch lions going after wildebeest anymore because I'm so conflicted. I want them both to survive, and that's actually not possible, right? Is that this wildebeest may survive today, but may not survive tomorrow. And so I don't watch those shows anymore because I know what happens and I'm okay with it. It's just I don't necessarily need to witness it.
I find those hard to watch as well because, I mean, it's the zebra is just minding its own business, eating the grass. And
it's the food chain, right? And it's...
it's hard to watch.
I may have to look up this book and put it in the show notes, but there is a wonderful children's book talking about the food chain, but they don't talk about it like the food chain. The title of the book is Pass the Energy, Please. And it is, it's just a lovely children's book. And that's really what it's about, right? You've got the herbivores that are eating the grass and buds and leaves and berries and blah, blah, blah. And they're they are taking the sun's energy and transforming it into energy that they can use. Well, lions can't use that type of energy, but because the deer, for example, or the zebra in your example, has transformed that energy, now it's available actually for the lion. Or the snake, the mouse that gets eaten by the snake, or whatever. So, and the other thing that is sort of a misconception, it's predator and prey. It's an arms race to the top. What predators do, and we're not going to go into detail about this, but it's pretty interesting. What predators do is make the prey population in general stronger. So there is that. There is that.
If we're looking
there
at
is that. They, predators.
Bigger, grander picture.
Right. Predators don't always take out the weakest link or anything like that. Sometimes they get lucky. But often they're taking out the animals that are easy to catch. So they may be the ones that are not doing as well or for whatever reason, right? So it's the predators really keep prey populations strong, believe it or not. So now we've strayed down another little rabbit hole, but that's one of the things that if someone brings me a rabbit that he chased the crow away, we never want to yell at, belittle, chastise anybody that is trying to come to you with an animal, wanting to help that animal. But it does leave you open for educational opportunities with that particular individual, right?
Yes. And that brings us back to today, which is I went into this conversation thinking that we'd be talking about a lot of social media and putting up flyers on telephone poles, but really so much outreach is this telephone conversation, this face-to-face conversation, and then the conversations between more senior and more entry-level rehabilitators.
Yes.
There's this tradition of, this is a conversation that's going to come up in your practice with the public, and let's get good at telling the story of why this is important in a way that lifts this person up and
exactly
elevates their knowledge about this.
Exactly. We want them to be our ally. We want them to go out and know what to do or where to go the next time something happens. Or if a neighbor comes to them and they found something, then they have a better idea what to do. And of course, we want people as much as possible to get outdoors, explore nature, see, be more connected to our environment, because that's what's going to save everybody is if we're a lot more connected with nature and the environment and how it works, because we affect it all the time and we're also part of it, and we need to act like that, like we're part of it. And these people who are coming to us are already connected to that individual animal. So I can use that, and use is the wrong phrase, but I can, because of that connection, now it has the person a little bit more open to hear, it might be a really good idea if you can keep your cats inside, that would really help future songbird babies. Or if you can't keep them inside all summer long, maybe you can keep them inside in the spring and in the fall. That still helps. But I can give you all kinds of resources to help you train your animal, if they're open to this, to keep your cats inside. It's safer for your cats for this, and this reason, but it's also safer for wildlife. So it leaves them interested. And so I want to help them at the point that they're interested. And if we're talking about cats, we're going to talk about cats. If we're going to talk about don't grab the bunny from the crow, then we'll talk about it that way. But I'll try to do it in a very gentle way, because I do not want to belittle anybody.
The point is, we didn't start that conversation with a finger pointing.
Exactly.
Saying, oh, somebody doesn't keep their cat indoors.
Now, and that does kind of lead to social media. So one of the things that I think that we have to be very careful of is when we are posting about a particular animal that we might have in care. Let's say it was a rabbit that was caught by a cat, that we don't want to start that post out by pointing fingers, just like you just said. This horrible person did this, this, and this, and then he kept the bunny for 2 days before bringing him to me, and I don't know if I can save it. And I've seen posts like that. That doesn't...
Oh, post by rehabilitators.
Yes. That is... I'm trying to win over hearts and teach people. I'm not trying to point fingers and tell people how horrible they are. There are horrible things that happen, but the vast majority of animals that need rehabilitative care, the people who find them are trying to do the right thing. Inside, I might be cringing because they kept that great horned owl chick for 2 weeks and they fed it chicken. But I know that they did it with the best of intentions.
Sure.
So I want to approach them that way. And I want to approach any posts that I do on any kind of social media that way, saying, hey, we got these 2 young great horned owl chicks. Let me tell you a little bit about when great horned owls nest. Unfortunately, the finders really tried to do the best they can, but they did feed them, or they were fed inappropriately. You kind of make it really general, not pointing fingers again. And that can lead to something called metabolic bone disease. And then you can talk about that. You don't even have to say that maybe the birds survived or maybe the birds didn't survive. That doesn't even need to be part of the post. But I don't want to point fingers. It doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help the future great horned owls. And those people, if they saw that post, they're going to know who they're talking about. And they're going to be like, why would we bring you anything else? I'm ashamed. I feel bad already. Why would I... and then I'm going to tell my neighbors, don't bring them to her. She's just going to badmouth you. It just doesn't help. Social media can be used for a lot of good, and we just have to be careful with our voice on that, on social media. And it can be used for teaching and of course, sometimes cute animal pictures. That's the other thing on social media, by the way. If you are a rehabilitator and you are posting pictures on Facebook, for example, you want to make sure that you are handling that animal appropriately. You're wearing the appropriate PPE, protective equipment, and you don't want to showcase them off in any kind of cutesy way like you would with your dog or cat. Okay. They're cute on their own, as far as like young fox kits or things like that. And you can have that just really beautiful photograph, either showing the animal being examined or in a crate or something like that, but definitely not stressed. But we don't want to showcase these animals like they're pets. And
I'm seeing a lot of this.
There's a lot of that, and that's not
especially,
professional.
I mean, there's people who, like you said, are well-meaning and taking animals in just because they feel like they're doing a good thing. And that's one thing. But then another level is people who do sell themselves as rehabilitators who are taking animals in, but then sort of petifying them.
Yeah, and they're not doing it intentionally.
Presenting them
right?
as pets. Mm-hmm. And I'm seeing, as much as we all love owls, now knowing what I know is that, well, some of these animals we're seeing who are imprinting on humans are then not going to be releasable.
Right.
They may or may not be being held legally. So we're getting into this muddy water of, we got to make sure that the people tuning into this are here for best practices, but how do we kind of spread the best practices in a way that doesn't have people put their defenses up?
Right. And I think that the first thing that I do tell people this, is before you post, if you're a wildlife rehabilitator and you're going to post on this on your Facebook page, for example, you pause and you think twice. You take a look at that photograph, for example, and that text and say, okay, if I was on the other side reading this, what is the message that I would take away from it? We all know that a picture's worth 1,000 words. If I have got the Fox kit up to my face, touching noses with it, that's one thing that people are going to take away from that photograph or from that post, whether they read it or not. I mean, we know that all of us just a lot of times scroll through just to look at pictures or little videos or whatever. That's a very different message than if I have a little fox kit, maybe 2 fox kits or something like that. They're being examined by a veterinarian very gently, that kind of thing. Or maybe they're in the enclosure that I have them in, and they're all in a hollowed out log looking out at me. Can be a very different message. The other thing that you mentioned that I want to just bring up very briefly is legality. Is that a lot of times there are Good Samaritan laws that say if you find an injured wild animal, you can keep it. In Minnesota, I think it's like 24 to 48 hours. I can't remember right now. In order to give you time to get it to a rehabilitator. But if I'm talking to somebody and this happens, it doesn't happen near as much as it used to, but that somebody is calling you just for information on how to raise a particular animal, and that's why they're calling you. And as a rehabilitator, I won't give out that information because I want to get this animal to a rehabilitator, someone who's trained. And if I bring up something like, well, it's illegal for you to keep it, they don't care. And they don't care because of why they're calling you and why they want to take care of this animal and why they want to invest the time. Because they are emotionally connected. They think it might be a great project for the kids. They don't care if it's illegal. They don't care.
And I bet it's really hard to say no to kids who are like, well, my mom, can we keep it? Or can we at least, take care of it while it's getting better?
Sure.
We'll just keep it in a box and we'll give it the water and formula and...
Right. So I mean,
this is going to keep coming up. It's good as communicators of wildlife best practices. And even just for me, growing in this role, it'll be good for me to learn how to better explain to people the who, what, where, why of why this isn't not a good idea. Always the first step should be find your local rehabilitator and give them a call. And if possible, do that before you've touched the animal or engaged it.
And for a future podcast too, I think that whether it's you and I and a few other people to talk about best practices on the telephone, best practices via social media, those kinds of things I think would be great. There are several books that the National Wildlife Rehabilitators Association have in their online store about how to approach different subjects on the phone, especially. Most of us get involved in wildlife rehabilitation because we really love animals and want to help the animals. We don't necessarily want to deal with people. But as in a lot of careers or professions, when you are dealing with animals, you're also dealing with a lot of people. And so it just really makes a lot of sense to learn how to do it effectively because we want it effective. We want to keep animals in place that do not need to come into rehabilitative care. When a finder calls the Department of Natural Resources, for example, and they just say, let nature take its course, then those people they keep looking and keep wanting to, they still think that this animal needs help. And so they will keep looking. And that's how they find sometimes rehabilitators. And then we can take the time to talk to them about, again, like the natural history and this has been our experience in X, Y, or Z. Or sometimes it's the animal does need rescue or does need to come in, and let me give you instructions on how to either capture that animal safely, or I can come out, or the next steps, right? Because a lot of people, if you just say, well, let nature take its course, it just rings false a lot of times. And so they need more detail. They need more something. I mean, that might be the right answer. But if you don't give anything else or any kind of context to it, then it's just hard because you don't understand why that I'm supposed to leave it alone when it was hit by a car and it's still alive, and I'm trying to be compassionate here. One of the other things you mentioned a lot earlier is something that rehabilitators are also, and it's really hard to do in the busy season, but especially when we're talking to finders on the phone or in person, is the story. Humans are about stories. All of us are. We're always telling our friends, what did we do today? Well, it's a story. But people who intersect with wildlife that have never intersected with wildlife before, that injured rabbit, that injured hawk, that injured eagle, that injured fox, whatever it is, that is a huge thing in their life. It's huge. They're going to be talking about it for a very long time. And not all of those stories are going to have happy endings. It's not Disney. But we can either make that narrative or that story better, not by lying or anything, but helping them process what is going on, or we can make it worse. We can easily make it worse by dismissing them, by making them feel bad, by all of those types of things that we've talked about already. So we are about stories, and we can help, and we're part of their story with that particular animal. So I want to make it such a great story. And that sounds weird. It sounds like I'm Disneyfying it, but I'm not. I'm not trying to make it something that it's not. But I want this person going away thinking that they did do the best that they could. And whatever happens to that animal will be in the best interest of that animal. And, oh my gosh, they'll know what to do next time. And if I can direct them in the right way, then maybe the next time they are in their neighborhood are going to put up a strip mall when they've already got 5 strip malls, then maybe they might raise their voice and say, we might be destroying some habitat. And there are going to be animals and plants that live in that habitat that maybe we should take a double check and look. So for me, rehabilitation, yes, it's about the individual animal, but in the bigger scope of it, it is actually about the environment. It is about the environment and saving habitat. And if this is my connection with the finders, is that individual young sparrow that is coming in, or young hawk, or whatever it is, then I'm going to take it. I'm going to take it. I don't, and I may only have a few minutes with them, but that few minutes can help shape that story for them going forward.
Wow, this conversation went way deeper and more serious.
Sorry.
Than I
didn't know it was going to go this way either.
And of course, you're a master at this because you've been doing it for so long. But there's this balance of dealing with, like you said, not just the animal, but the people and the community, and acting in a way that's in the best interest of the animal and the population and the community. And it's such a complicated topic. I think today was a great discussion primer into a lot of things we could jump into. Mm-hmm. But that gives us a good kind of framework for starting to think about our interactions with the people we serve, the animals we serve, and how to do better outreach and more socially and animally responsible social media.
And I
so interesting.
I want to just encourage everybody to lean on each other. I work with several people that I don't do my own Facebook, but the Raptor Center does Facebook. I follow a lot of Facebook pages. And I can see a lot of posts where like, this is great. This is a positive post. Even if it's about a sad subject, it's positive. It gets some information out. I can see the point of this post. And so I work with a lot of individual rehabilitators that have started their own Facebook pages, and they run their posts by me and say, what do you think of this picture? What do you think of this post? And I will comment on it. I think it's great, or I think you should tweak this or tweak that. Choose a different picture, or crop this picture, and then this picture will be okay. But this is, what is the point of the post? Why are you putting it out there? And so we need to help each other a little bit more on that and be a little bit more open and being okay with that. And it's hard. It's not easy, but if it's not just me out here. There's a lot of wildlife rehabilitators. We are all in this together, even though we might be separated by hours and hours of driving. But we can help each other in this way. And that just helps everybody. It just helps everybody. And that's what we want. So there you go.
Awesome. Well, I think that is as much as my brain can handle for today.
It's never ending, isn't it, Kirk? I mean, I told you when we started this, it's like there's so many different subjects we're going to talk about and really get in deep in. And we could just, like you mentioned earlier, we could just talk about social media posts. There you go.
Well,
thanks, Kirk, for being a co-host today. I really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.
Coming out from behind the curtain was exciting. You might not hear the excitement in my voice at the end of a long work week, but it is always interesting to learn more and more about this.
And I will say, I'm going to tell everybody that's listening right now, and you cannot cut this out of the podcast because he does all the magic, is that Kirk makes the podcast sound really good. Makes me sound wonderful. And our guests, he just showcases our guests so well. And the music he chooses and all that kind of stuff. So, Kirk, I just want to say thank you because this podcast would not exist without you, especially in this format. So thank you for that.
I'm not crying. You're crying.
That's it. And if you can't tell, I really like working with Kirk. He's awesome. So thanks everybody for listening. This was a lot of fun for me. Really enjoyed it.
Fun for me too. Thanks for co-hosting, and we will see each other and see our listeners back here
very soon.
That's episode.
Right. Next episode. All right. Thanks so much. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Wildlife Rehabilitation from Rescue to Release, Season 2. Wildlife Rehabilitation from Rescue to Release is a production of Partners for Wildlife, working hand in hand with wildlife rehabilitators and veterinarians to improve the welfare of orphaned, ill, and injured wildlife. Our executive producer is me, Gail Buell. I'm the Partnership Coordinator for Partners for Wildlife at the University of Minnesota College of Veterinary Medicine's Raptor Center. To learn more about the Raptor Center and Partners for Wildlife, please visit us at raptor.umn.edu. Our producer is Kirk Clockey. Special thanks to Partners for Wildlife and the Raptor Center at the University of Minnesota College of Veterinary Medicine. And that's our show. Hope you'll join us again next time.